In the quiet coastal reaches of Evergreen Bay, nestled against the sheltering slopes of Cascade Hills, there stood a humble clinic that bore the faint smell of saline and antiseptics, alongside the subtle hush of distant tides. Though modest by any measure, Stone's Evergreen Clinic possessed a rare serenity, for it was staffed by none other than Dr. Alan Stone himself, a man whose war-honed hands belied his gentle eyes, whose kindness softened the lines of experience etched across his brow. Many a traveler and local soul sought him out for his steady composure and miraculous ability to piece broken bodies back together, an ability earned in the grim trenches of the Outer Colonies War, where he had once served as a medic. Word had spread through the region, as word often does in small towns, that an extraordinary visitor arrived under the cloak of early morning rain. Her name was Lyra Moraine, and she came not from any city of Earth, but from the distant world of Zareth, a place said to glitter with turquoise skies and silver forests. Indeed, Lyra possessed the signature hue of her people, skin of a faint, dusky purple that glimmered beneath the fluorescent lights of the reception hall. A diplomat by trade, she carried with her an air of quiet authority and unwavering dignity, despite the intricate hoverchair that supported her fragile frame. For a decade, she had found herself unable to walk, confined to that adaptive device that hovered at knee level with a whisper of energy unknown to most dwellers of Cascade Hills. Yet, Lyra had not come to Earth for idle conversation or political dealings. Rather, she had sought the rumor of Dr. Stone's skill, his extraordinary talent for coaxing broken limbs back to function, his rumored willingness to attempt treatments that others deemed impossible. In Lyra's posture, there rested a glimmer of faith, a slender candlelight of hope in a long-forgotten corridor. 10 years she had suffered. 10 years had she prayed for a cure. Now, with eyes wide and searching, she placed her trust in this unassuming man, whose calm steadiness made even the most forbidding horizon seem surmountable. "I heard you might be able to help me." She spoke softly upon first entering, her voice replete with the lilting accent of her homeland. "Zaretha's greatest minds have tried and failed, but they tell me that you, Dr. Stone, have a knack for the impossible." Alan Stone bowed his head with a humble laugh. He was neither a vain nor arrogant man, and the repeated praise from clients and colleagues always left him slightly ill at ease. "I promise no miracles, Ms. Moraine," he said gently, "only a willingness to try. And sometimes," he added with the smallest of smiles, "that is more powerful than certainty." Lyra's eyes shone, and she offered him a regal incline of her head. "Hope is all I have left, and if your skill extends half so far as rumor suggests, then I must place my faith in you." Such was the beginning of their unlikely acquaintance, as the hush of morning rain murmured about the windows, and as the sun struggled to penetrate the pale haze over the bay. The days in Evergreen Bay were measured by the hush of tides rolling in and out, by the sun cresting the ridgeline of Cascade Hills, and by the gentle lull that greeted the nights. For Dr. Alan Stone, each day carried a stream of patients, fisherfolk with twisted ankles, hikers battered by missteps along the rocky trails, elders whose knees had simply lost the resilience of youth. And in a secluded corner of his clinic's main hall, Lyra Moraine waited patiently, observing the swirling rhythms of Earth life with her large, curious eyes. From the moment of her arrival, it had become apparent that Lyra's condition was not merely physical. The advanced apparatus supporting her suggested the involvement of alien technologies that Earth had only glimpsed in fleeting diplomatic exchanges. Dr. Stone, unswayed by the novelty, simply devoted himself to learning, measuring, running quiet tests, and sometimes pausing to lay a hand gently on her shoulder in reassurance. Each test revealed more complexities, more mysteries. Lyra's spinal structure, though reminiscent of Earth biology, appeared to include trace amounts of a metallic compound unknown in any human body. Perhaps that was the hallmark of her world, which orbited a distant star. Where Earth spines possessed dense bone and flexible cartilage, hers included a lattice of shining filaments that glowed faintly under scanning equipment. Yet these filaments lay dormant, as if severed from their original power source. That was the reason that Lyra, who once walked and even danced upon the halls of her diplomatic station, had found herself paralyzed. Curious, enthralled, and determined, Alan devoted many an hour in his office to reading thick medical compendiums about Zarath physiology, what little information was available, that is. No one on Earth had ever attempted a procedure quite like this. Indeed, the only reason such data even existed was the gradual fraternization of scientists across the galaxies after the Outer Colonies War, wherein Earth had found a tenuous alliance with Zarath to stave off a yet more ominous threat. That fleeting unity had borne fruit in the form of limited cultural and medical exchanges, but it remained incomplete, overshadowed by the complexities of interplanetary politics. Lyra herself remained stoically patient during these sessions, her wide eyes occasionally shining with suppressed yearning. She answered Dr. Stone's questions as best she could, describing the medicinal traditions of her people, the attempts at advanced treatments that had all failed, the heartbreak that accompanied each new disappointment. Through it all, Alan never appeared daunted. He would press on, adjusting the angle of her leg braces, testing the nerve conduction in her ankles, or lightly running an instrument across the sole of her foot to monitor reflexes. "Your nerve responses are there," he murmured one day in mild astonishment, watching the reading flicker across the monitor. "They're simply not passing the signal beyond a certain threshold." Lyra gave a gentle tilt of her head. "Some of our healers on Zarath said it was an energy disruption, a misalignment in the lattice that runs up my spine. A million attempts to correct it. Yet here we stand, no progress." Alan lowered the instrument, pressing his lips together in thought. "Perhaps we haven't found the right approach, Ms. Moraine. A million attempts, but not the correct one. Sometimes, the simplest method can be the key, like a single note that resonates in an uncharted corridor of your body's system." At those words, Lyra studied him, a flicker of wonder passing over her face. For a moment, she recalled one of Zarath's early healers saying something similar, an old man who had died before completing his research, one of the last practitioners of a more ancient healing tradition overshadowed by technology. Perhaps Dr. Stone's approach, though modest, might indeed rediscover that vanished chord. Time slipped by in the little clinic, as the dappled sunlight of mid-autumn danced across the glossy floors and wide windows. Locals chatted about the strange guest, the alien in their midst, though few had seen her, and even fewer engaged her in conversation. Evergreen Bay was a small, welcoming town, but it had rarely entertained visitors from the next city, let alone from across the stars. By the fifth day, Dr. Stone had begun working more extensively with Lyra, adopting some of her own planet's medical knowledge, those old notes gleaned from the archives. She lent him scrolls of data, half of it in a dialect that he required a translator to read. Undaunted, Alan studied them nightly, often burning the midnight oil with a concentrated expression that belied his usual calm. It did not escape Lyra's notice, and a gentle warmth began to form behind her eyes whenever she saw him hunched over the desk, chin resting on a propped palm, absorbing all he could in order to help her. And so, one twilight, as the sky over Cascade Hills turned lavender and the sea breezes carried the tang of salt water through the open windows, Lyra ventured a request. "Dr. Stone," she said softly, "might I trouble you to explain your approach in simpler terms? I've read many of your Earth texts, but they feel incomplete." Alan looked up from a thick binder. "Certainly," he replied, and there was a softness in his voice. "I approach nerve regeneration through a combination of physical therapy and direct nerve stimulation. In typical spinal injuries, it encourages reconnection or rewiring around the damaged region. For you, though, it's not purely physical. There's an energy conduction aspect beyond normal Earth physiology." She listened with rapt attention. The idea that her body might be coaxed, gently, to reawaken those dormant pathways gave her more hope than she had felt in a long while. "And you truly believe it can be done?" she asked, her voice tremulous, as though she dreaded the answer. Alan's brow furrowed. "I do," he said at length. "Though I won't deceive you, it will be difficult. Hard work. We'll have to push the boundaries of what your body is accustomed to. But I sense potential in your physiology, and you yourself are still receptive. You want this. That matters." A small tear shimmered in Lyra's eye as she bowed her head. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me." And so the next stage began. Carefully devised physical manipulations, guided by Alan's knowledge of wartime triage and the advanced theories gleaned from Zarath's old archives. He would place his fingers at the precise spots of her spine, pressing gently, sometimes humming to generate vibration. He discovered that certain tones caused a faint ripple of luminescence in her spinal filaments. By layering physical therapy with those harmonic touches, a spark of new conduction emerged. Lyra's first sign of progress was a subtle twitch in her foot, so subtle that one might have dismissed it as a spasm. But Alan's trained eyes caught it instantly. "You moved," he breathed, excitement lighting his face like dawn. "Look!" Wonder suffused Lyra's features. She had felt it, the ghost of motion that she had longed for all these years. Though it lasted only a heartbeat, it was enough to tell her that the path to walking again might truly be within reach. News of Lyra's improvement spread quietly through the small staff at Stone's Evergreen Clinic, creating a sense of measured excitement. The nurses and aides, once uncertain about working on an alien figure with advanced hardware, now found themselves inspired by her determination. They, too, began to marvel at Dr. Stone's unrelenting dedication to every minute detail, from calibrating Lyra's hoverchair for better posture to reconfiguring the clinic's scanning instruments so they could glean more accurate data on her luminous neural lattice. Yet, no good deed remains free of challenge. Whispers from beyond Earth's horizon carried word that the Zareth Council, a body that oversaw diplomatic relations, had grown uneasy about Lyra's choice. They had watched her from afar, expecting at any moment a request for official intervention, or at least a formal permission for Dr. Stone's attempts. But it never came. Lyra, who carried a diplomat's rank, navigated these protocols with a measured hand. She had every right to seek medical care on Earth, just as any delegate might. Yet she would soon learn that bureaucracy was seldom so straightforward. One evening, as the sky darkened and the clinic's fluorescent lights hummed in the silence, Lyra received a communication on her handheld device. A message from the council. They expressed concern. They doubted the efficacy of a primitive method, a term that stung Alan when she relayed it to him. The council demanded updates, data, immediate results. They threatened to forcibly return her to Zareth if it appeared Earth's approach was too outlandish. Alan watched her expression cloud, saw the old fear creeping behind her eyes. She had tried so many times, failed so many times, that the threat of losing this fragile shard of hope cut deeper than any physical wound. "Let them come," he said softly, a quiet determination flaring in him. "We'll show them the truth." Lyra reached for his hand, a gesture that surprised him. "I'm not afraid," she whispered, as if trying to reassure him as much as herself. "Only anxious. They've always believed my condition beyond help. I need them to see that we're making progress." Alan gently clasped her hand in return, forgetting for a moment all the lines that separated doctor and patient, human and alien. "One day at a time," he replied. "We'll gather enough evidence to prove that your body is healing." A fleeting sense of warmth passed between them. Lyra's eyes glistened. For an instant, they held that contact, two souls equally uncertain of the future, yet bound by a shared mission that transcended species or bureaucracy. Then, with a gentle exhalation, she released his hand, and the moment passed. In the days that followed, a more rigorous therapy regimen took shape. The still morning air would ring with Lyra's subdued gasps as she worked her limbs against the resistance of specially fashioned straps, her face beaded with sweat, her slender arms trembling from the effort. Yet she endured. Alan marveled at her resolve, reminding himself again and again that, for all the ethereal calm she projected, beneath her violet skin beat a heart of unyielding steel. He began employing innovative methods that combined mild electrical impulses with physical stretching. At times, he would support her legs gently, instructing her to focus on the memory of walking. "Visualize it," he would say. "Remember the sensation of stepping onto your home's floor, the feel of each toe pressing against the ground. Your mind is half the battle." Lyra found herself trembling under these new demands, but she obeyed. She pictured the spires of her father's estate on Zareth, where she had once danced under twin moons. She recalled the hush of a meadow at dawn, dew-laden grass tickling her bare feet. With each recollection, she strove to link the memory of motion to her present condition, hoping the lines in her brain would reconnect with her body. And sometimes, a spark of progress jolted through her. An involuntary twitch, a faint curling of toes, enough to coax a small, triumphant grin from Alan. Between these sessions, they would speak of her life, her people, her reasons for coming to Earth. Lyra, in turn, would quietly probe at Alan's war-torn past, gleaning from him bits and pieces of his service days. He rarely spoke of the war to anyone, but to her, perhaps sensing her sincerity, he revealed glimpses of the harrowing nights he had endured under bombardment in the outer colonies. She listened with compassion, never pressing too far. Over time, though, they discovered a shared truth. Each had known defeat, heartbreak, and the soul's silent longing to find purpose once more. Dr. Stone found himself approaching each new day with renewed anticipation, noticing how his heart quickened whenever Lyra entered the therapy wing. He attributed it to his desire for a breakthrough, at least on the surface. But a deeper part of him sensed the forming of a bond, a gentle connection that defied the boundaries of species or circumstance. This unspoken bond hung between them like a shared secret. Their progress, though steady, was not linear. Some mornings, Lyra awoke with pins and needles surging through her legs, a curious mixture of discomfort and faint hope. Other days, she felt numb, disheartened by the slow pace. Each time, Alan would stand by her side, reminding her that healing could be as fickle as the sea's tides, ebbing one day, surging the next. She grew to rely upon his calm, stoic encouragement. Word arrived from Zareth. A delegation would be traveling to Earth to see Lyra's condition for themselves. They would land in the broad city to the north, then make the journey by transit to Cascade Hills. The date was set, and an undercurrent of tension ran through the clinic's corridors as the day approached. Lyra, though proud, worried that her incomplete progress would fail to impress the notoriously skeptical council members. Alan's staff, for their part, hastened to compile data, to dress the therapy room in a semblance of professional refinement for alien visitors. Amid these preparations, a subtle evolution took place. Lyra's therapy sessions began yielding greater results. She could flex her ankles on command, albeit slightly, and her knees would bend faintly. On a memorable Tuesday afternoon, she managed to support herself for 3 entire seconds with minimal assistance, gripping Alan's arms for balance. The strain upon her face softened into sheer astonishment as she realized she was, in a sense, standing upright. Though the triumph was brief, it set her spirit aflame with hope. Alan was equally exhilarated, but he tempered his enthusiasm, mindful of the mountain they had yet to climb. Each moment, he carefully documented the improvements. He noted her body's subtle trembling, her neural signals, the luminous flicker that seemed to pulse in the filaments along her spine whenever she achieved a new milestone. A pattern emerged in that glow, as if her body were forging new conduits for nerve signals. It was mesmerizing, reminiscent of cosmic starlight dancing across her back. He found it strangely beautiful, a testament to the wonders of biology across worlds. But outside the protective walls of the clinic, cautionary winds blew. Some local residents, though few, grew uneasy at the notion of alien politics playing out in their quiet hamlet. Rumors drifted in from the city that other interstellar envoys had begun to question Earth's right to attempt such radical procedures on a being of Zareth. A faint shadow of doubt began to creep, threatening to overshadow the delicate progress they had made. The delegation arrived on a gloomy day, the sky shrouded in leaden clouds that reflected in the mirror-like surface of the bay. 3 figures emerged from a sleek craft, each clad in formal attire woven from shimmering Zareth cloth. Their faces bore the same noble cast as Lyra's, with skin tones ranging from deep lavender to subdued blue. At their lead was Counselor Jaros, a man of stern aspect and unyielding voice, whose posture communicated silent authority. Lyra greeted them at the clinic's entrance, well aware that her hover chair might set an unfavorable tone, reminding them of her infirmity. Yet, Dr. Stone stood by her side, and for one fleeting moment, she felt heartened by his presence. Counselor Jaros cast a cursory glance around the clinic lobby, where local patients sat with mild expressions of curiosity or discomfort, and where a single nurse offered a polite nod. "So," he said quietly, turning to Lyra, "you have chosen to remain here, to rely on the care of this human physician, rather than return home where our technology might truly heal you?" Lyra met his gaze calmly. "I have chosen the method that has shown me progress," she replied, voice firm. I trust Dr. Stone's approach because I have seen its results, small, but significant. And you claim these results are verifiable. Counselor Jarrows pressed, arching an eyebrow. We shall see. He then shifted his attention to Alan, who maintained a respectful but unwavering stance. Show me what you have achieved, Doctor, he said, the last word tinged with faint challenge. Alan led them to the therapy room, guiding them through the rows of exercise equipment that lined the walls. There, with measured care, he displayed the compiled data on a large monitor, demonstrating the incremental improvements in Lyra's nerve conduction. He explained how the interplay of physical manipulation and resonance therapy had gradually awakened her dormant neural lattice. Graphs flickered across the screen, showing improved reflex times and muscle tone. The delegates watched in pensive silence, some with arms folded. Finally, Alan assisted Lyra as she transferred from her hoverchair. She set her feet against the ground. Supporting most of her weight, Alan encouraged her to stand. She grasped his arms for balance, inhaling a trembling breath. Counselor Jarrow's gaze followed every movement with eagle-eyed scrutiny. Lyra closed her eyes, summoning the memory of her own body's dance. Then, with a ragged exhale, she straightened her spine. A hush fell over the room. Lyra stood. She swayed, nearly collapsing, but Alan stabilized her. For 2 heartbeats, she was upright, head held high, legs supporting at least a fraction of her weight. Then she sank back into his arms, panting from the effort. Modest though it was, the demonstration left a stirring impression. One of the delegates murmured in the Zareth language, subdued. Another peered at the screen again, as though uncertain how to interpret the data. Jarrows, unmoved in expression, made a slight gesture toward Alan. She stands, yes, but only barely. This is not a cure, nor is it advanced. Alan inclined his head politely. Progress is progress, he answered calmly. We're forging a path that no one has walked before, human or Zareth. I don't claim we've arrived at the summit, but we are climbing. A tension hovered in the space. Lyra, catching her breath, stared at Jarrows with a mingling of defiance and appeal. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Jarrows gave a curt nod. Continue your work. But heed me, my patience, and that of the council, is not infinite. Without waiting for further exchange, he turned to depart, his retinue following in stern silence. As the door closed behind them, Lyra exhaled shakily, her arms clinging to Alan for support. You did well, he reassured her. But her eyes flicked uncertainly to the hallway. I wonder if it was enough. Alan gently rested a hand on her shoulder, feeling the faint tremor that rippled through her. One step at a time, he whispered. It will be enough. You'll see. Their work intensified in the weeks following the council's visit. If they had once approached therapy with determination, they now met it with unyielding resolve. Under Alan's guidance, new exercises were introduced, ones that tested Lyra's fortitude to its limits. Partial weight-bearing treadmill sessions, with harnesses to safeguard her from falls. Muscle stimulation protocols timed with melodic tones that resonated in her luminous spinal filaments. Within that crucible of exertion, Lyra discovered strength she never knew she possessed. On certain days, the pain in her limbs proved overwhelming, so much so that tears slipped unbidden down her cheeks, and Alan's staff gently urged her to rest. Yet, she refused. She insisted on continuing until the last vestiges of her energy were spent. And while Alan respected her determination, he also recognized a line between progress and self-destruction. Often, he had to persuade her to pause, to let the body recover. It was in these moments, as she half collapsed into the hover chair, that he would kneel by her side, offering water, a gentle word of praise, or a comforting hand upon her arm. Their bond, at first purely professional, evolved into a friendship built on mutual trust. Lyra found in Alan a steadfast ally who never once saw her as an experiment or a lesser being. He recognized her vulnerability, but he did not define her by it. When she needed encouragement, he provided it. When she needed tough love, he gave it unflinchingly. And through the glass windows of the therapy room, staff and occasional onlookers witnessed a connection that transcended the usual patient-doctor dynamic. They saw in Alan's gaze a quiet admiration, and in Lyra's eyes, a spark of gratitude that edged towards something deeper. Yet, neither voiced such emotions aloud. The seriousness of their mission overshadowed any possibility for personal entanglement. After all, the council's scrutiny remained ever-present, and a single misstep could see Lyra whisked back to Zareth for more conventional, and likely fruitless, treatments. Alan maintained his focus on the tangible goal, to restore her ability to walk, to grant her the autonomy and dignity that had been denied her for so long. Local rumors soon drifted to the city, and from there, out to the broader spheres of interplanetary communication, that an alien diplomat was making strides, literally, in a modest clinic on Earth. Skepticism abounded. Some believed the stories were exaggerated, a ploy by Earth's medical community to solicit attention or funds. Others speculated that Lyra Moraine was no true diplomat, but an actress in an elaborate ruse. But amid the cynicism, there grew a small but fervent curiosity about the technique Dr. Stone employed, a technique that blended manual therapy and resonance in ways unseen before. With curiosity came visitors, a handful of reporters seeking interviews, starry-eyed well-wishers with half-baked theories, even the occasional eccentric inventor offering contraptions that promised radical cures. Lyra found it overwhelming, though she tried to receive them with diplomatic courtesy. Alan, preferring the quiet sanctity of his clinic, navigated them politely but firmly, refusing to let Lyra's therapy become a sideshow. "You are becoming a celebrity," he teased her quietly one late afternoon, as they prepared for another session. The sun draped the therapy room in dusky orange, catching the faint glimmer of the swirling filaments in Lyra's spine. She gave a wry half-smile, adjusting her posture in the chair. "I would rather walk in anonymity than ride in fame," she replied. "I have no desire for spectacle, Dr. Stone, only for progress." Alan nodded, regarding her with his calm, thoughtful expression. "I know," he said softly, "and we'll get you there." Her lavender lips curved into a gentle smile. In that warm hush, for a moment, they allowed themselves a quiet sense of camaraderie that felt oddly like happiness, blossoming in the midst of adversity. Progress continued, sometimes in leaps, sometimes in fits. Lyra began taking her first halting steps with the aid of a walker that Dr. Stone had modified. Each step demanded a flood of concentration, summoning neural signals across newly awakened pathways. She learned anew how to balance, how to trust her weight on legs once deemed useless. On the day she managed 4 consecutive steps without faltering, the staff in the therapy room burst into spontaneous applause, and tears traced a shining path down Lyra's cheeks. She was walking. Not well, not effortlessly, but undeniably walking. The news reached Counselor Jaros, who sent word of a second visit. This time, he would not come alone. A higher representative from Zareth, affiliated with the medical council itself, would accompany him, eager to witness the rumored developments. The tone of his message remained guarded, but the undertone of disbelief wavered. Perhaps, Alan hoped, they would at last see that their so-called primitive approach held merit. Yet, on the eve of their arrival, a startling event shook the clinic. Late at night, just as the staff was finishing up chores, an intruder attempted to break in, some unknown figure, clad in dark attire, rummaging through patient records and research logs. Alan, roused by the silent alarm, confronted the intruder. Before the authorities could arrive, the trespasser fled, leaving behind only scattered papers and incomplete data files. It was a mystery that left everyone on edge. "Why would someone want these logs?" an exasperated nurse asked the next morning. "They don't contain classified Earth secrets. It's just therapy notes and scans." Alan, frowning, glanced toward Lyra. "Unless the data has become valuable to some party that wants to replicate or disrupt our method." Lyra's gaze darkened. "Or to sabotage us before the council arrives." The notion that her progress might be threatened stirred old feelings of powerlessness and dread. Alan rested a reassuring hand on her shoulder, promising that they would secure the clinic more thoroughly, that the local authorities would investigate. But the sting of vulnerability lingered. Despite the attempted theft, life carried on, for duty does not relent in the face of uncertainty. Lyra and Alan continued their regimen. He introduced an advanced stage of therapy, focusing on building strength in her core and hips. It was grueling. Each session ended with Lyra drenched in sweat, her breath ragged. But each session also ended with a small victory, A more stable stance, a steadier step, a flicker of improved reaction time in her lower extremities. In the quiet intervals, they spoke more openly than ever before. Lyra confided her fears about returning to Zareth, where her status as a crippled diplomat had once overshadowed her formidable talents. She recounted how, for years, she had felt diminished, overshadowed by the unspoken pity and scorn of her peers. Alan, in turn, opened up about the nightmares he still carried from the war, the men and women he couldn't save. Each word peeled back a layer of guarded reserve, forging a bond that pulsed with genuine empathy. This bond glowed most brightly one late evening, after an exhausting day's therapy. Lyra, trembling from strain, tried to stand from her hoverchair alone and nearly collapsed. Alan lunged to catch her, arms sliding around her waist as she clutched his shoulders. Their faces hovered inches apart, and for a breathless second, they simply stared. In her violet eyes, Alan glimpsed gratitude and longing. In his own reflection, he saw an unexpected tenderness. "Dr. Stone," she whispered, voice shaking. "I'm sorry. I was overconfident." He swallowed. "No, you're brave," he replied, his hand still steadying her. "Please, just be careful." For a moment that felt suspended in time, neither stepped back. Then, regaining composure, Alan guided her back to the chair. "Tomorrow," he said gently, "we can try again." Lyra simply nodded, the ghost of a smile on her lips, a flush coloring her cheeks in that subtle shade of amethyst. Neither of them commented on the electric tingle that had passed between them, but it lingered, unspoken yet undeniable. The day of the second council visit dawned bright, a swirl of crisp azure sky overhead, as though the cosmos itself had deemed to cast a favorable light upon the unfolding events. Counselor Jaros arrived alongside an esteemed figure known as High Medic Anareth, an older Zareth woman whose posture exuded wisdom and measured authority. Their retinue traveled by official transport, escorted by discreet security. Lyra greeted them in the foyer, standing beside her hoverchair, refusing to be seated when they arrived. High Medic Anareth gazed upon Lyra for a long moment, her expression inscrutable. "I have heard rumors," she said quietly, "that you have accomplished feats beyond expectation. I have come to witness these feats with my own eyes, to see if Dr. Stone's approach holds the promise of a cure, or if we chase illusions." Lyra squared her shoulders, drawing a steady breath. "I stand here of my own will, High Medic," she answered, attempting to mask her lingering quiver. "I would show you more than illusions." Alan escorted them into the therapy ward, accompanied by a few staff members. With a calm, methodical approach, he outlined the therapy protocols, the progressive data. On the screen, charts showed a clear upward trend. Lyra's neural conduction had risen from near zero to nearly half of normal function. Not perfect, but immeasurably better than before. Then came the demonstration. Holding lightly to a set of parallel bars, Lyra steadied herself. She drew in a measured breath, exhaled, and began to walk. Her steps were slow, deliberate, and at times shuddering, but each foot lifted and placed itself upon the polished floor in a steady cadence. The length of the bars might have been a mere 15 feet, but to Lyra, it felt like a marathon. The watchers saw the tension etched in her features, the determined set of her jaw. And when she reached the end, she managed to pivot, inelegantly, but pivot nonetheless, and walked back to the starting point. A hush cloaked the room. High Medic Anareth clasped her hands together in front of her, studying Lyra's posture as she sank onto a waiting chair. Counselor Jaros exchanged a look with Anareth, wearing an expression of reluctant wonder. "This," Anareth said finally, "is indeed progress." "It's only the beginning," Alan added quietly. "But it shows that by harnessing the synergy of physical therapy and resonance, we can heal what was thought unhealable." Anareth inclined her head. "Our people have always prized advanced technology, trusting machines more than our own ancient methods. Perhaps we have forgotten something fundamental. Dr. Stone, you may find that your approach resonates with the essence of Zareth's older traditions, ones overshadowed by time." Her words carried both an admission and a caution. "We," she concluded, "shall remain here briefly to observe further, to ensure that this improvement is genuine and lasting. If it is, then perhaps your clinic shall become the site of a pioneering endeavor between our worlds." At that, Alan caught Lyra's eye. A wave of relief mingled with excitement passed between them, for it seemed a new horizon had just opened. The delegation had not only withheld condemnation, but hinted at possible support. The promise of hope shone more brightly than ever. High Medic Anareth and her team spent the next few days monitoring Lyra's sessions, combing through data, and scrutinizing Dr. Stone's methods. They filmed, took samples, studied the luminous filaments along Lyra's spine with advanced scanners that Alan's clinic could only dream of. Yet, they did so respectfully, minding Lyra's comfort level, and occasionally acknowledging that their once unyielding skepticism had softened into genuine curiosity. For Lyra, the process was both exhilarating and exhausting. She allowed the medics to attach sensors, draw blood, measure her nerve impulses at all hours. Often, she felt as though she were existing in a fishbowl, every breath observed. Yet, each demonstration of her fledgling ability to stand or walk ignited a collective admiration from even the most stoic of researchers. Anareth herself proved particularly open-minded. She engaged Alan in lengthy discussions about the convergence of physical therapy and Zareth's ancestral methods. They debated the possible synergy between harmonic frequencies and muscle training, how the subtle vibrations might stimulate the dormant neural lattice in Lyra's spine. Some nights, they chatted well past the normal closing hours of the clinic, forging an unlikely intellectual partnership. Lyra, quietly listening nearby, could not help but feel moved by the sight of two worlds bridging a gap once deemed impassable. All the while, Counselor Jaros hovered in the background, occasionally frowning in thought, as if struggling to reconcile the scenes before him with his preconceived notions. Once, Lyra overheard him muttering to a colleague, "To think, after all these years, a human doctor might succeed where we failed. The council will be shaken." The days stretched into a week. Finally, Anareth gathered her team in the main conference room, summoning both Alan and Lyra. Her countenance was somber, but the corners of her eyes suggested a faint spark of optimism. "Dr. Stone," she began formally, "the Council of Zareth, and I as High Medic, cannot deny what we have witnessed. You have restored partial mobility to our diplomat, Ms. Moraine, a feat that surpasses a decade of fruitless efforts. We see in your methods a possibility we once dismissed." Alan nodded quietly, resting a hand on the back of Lyra's chair. The tension in the room was palpable. "That said," Anareth continued, "we must also ensure that further progress is not hindered. We propose a joint program, here at your clinic, to refine and expand these techniques, allowing Ms. Moraine to continue her therapy while also sharing knowledge with our own specialists." A breath of relief escaped Lyra. Then, to her surprise, Anareth placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Ms. Moraine, would you consent to remain here, under Dr. Stone's care, while collaborating with us to formalize these treatments? Your people and ours would benefit greatly." Lyra's gaze flicked to Alan, whose composure betrayed only a subtle spark of delight. "I would be honored," Lyra answered. "So long as Dr. Stone is agreeable, and so long as I can see this through until I can walk fully on my own." Alan nodded. "You have my cooperation," he said simply, though the weight behind his words conveyed far more. Thus, it was settled, forging a partnership that might change the course of interplanetary medicine. The days that followed burst with renewed purpose. Specialists from Zareth began arriving in small, carefully controlled groups, each bringing knowledge, scanning equipment, and precise instrumentation. Stone's Evergreen Clinic found itself at the epicenter of a remarkable synergy, where technology and simple, hands-on therapy coexisted. Where once the staff in the clinic outnumbered patients, now the halls bustled with men and women in sleek attire, conversing in both English and the musical lilt of the Zareth language. Despite the flurry of activity, Alan insisted that Lyra's routine remained sacrosanct. She continued her carefully planned exercises, with Alan's watchful presence at her side, guiding, supporting, sometimes scolding her to rest. Her progress, though steady, was not without setbacks. Some days, she felt unusual nerve pains that made her movements awkward. Other times, her posture faltered, forcing her to rely on the walker again. But through it all, her improvement remained undeniable. The farthest she had walked unaided rose from 5 steps to 10, then 15, forging an unbroken line across the therapy room floor. She began to navigate short distances without the walker, albeit unsteadily, while the watchers from Earth and Zareth observed with rapt attention. Each day, she gained more confidence, more muscle memory, and the luminous filaments in her spine shone ever more vibrantly, as if each new step awakened a reservoir of potential deep within. During these sessions, Alan found himself ever in awe. He had seen men broken by war who managed to stand again, but never had he witnessed such a profound transformation, layered with the complexities of alien physiology. And never had he felt such personal investment. Each victory, she claimed, ignited a corresponding flame in his heart. As for Lyra, she too recognized that her admiration for Alan was no longer mere gratitude. She had grown to rely upon his calm presence, to treasure each gentle word and reassuring smile. In fleeting moments, a deeper longing tugged at her, a longing to know if he felt the same stirrings that made her heart flutter whenever he stood near. But with so many eyes upon them, so many duties pressing in, she kept these sentiments cloaked, allowing her gratitude to shine openly, while her deeper emotions simmered unvoiced in the shadows. Not everyone embraced the new developments with open arms. Rumblings began among more conservative circles on Zareth, who felt that reliance on an Earth doctor exposed a weakness in their society's medical supremacy. Some even labeled Lyra a traitor to her own people, though such whispers rarely found their way openly to her ears. More pressing was the subtle pressure from certain Earth factions, who worried that sharing too much knowledge with Zareth might compromise Earth's intellectual property or resources. Amid these swirling cross-currents, Alan and Lyra stood at the junction, determined to maintain the integrity of their joint efforts. When queries arose, they answered honestly. Earth had something to learn from Zareth's advanced equipment, while Zareth had something to learn from Earth's manual, resonant-based therapy. The synergy brought hope to the hopeless. Was that not cause enough for unity? Still, tensions simmered. Counselor Jaros, apparently under pressure from his superiors, demanded frequent status updates. More than once, he arrived unannounced, critical eye scanning for signs of impropriety or deception. He took little solace in the positive data, clinging instead to a guarded air that made the staff uneasy. One particularly tense afternoon, Jaros confronted Lyra outside the therapy room. "Is this truly the path you wish to tread, Ms. Moraine?" he demanded, his tone sharp. "You have aligned yourself so thoroughly with these humans that many on Zareth question your loyalty to our people." Lyra drew herself up, meeting his gaze unflinchingly. "I have no illusions about my loyalty, Counselor," she replied, voice resonant with quiet authority. "I am loyal to the well-being of both our peoples. If I can regain my ability to walk, and if that knowledge helps others, how is that betrayal?" Jaro's lips tightened. "You speak as though it were all so simple. You were once revered on Zareth, but your long infirmity made you a symbol of our weaknesses. Some might twist your success here into an attempt to shame our own medical experts." That notion stung, but Lyra refused to flinch. "If they feel shame, it is of their own making," she said. "All I wish is to stand on my own 2 feet again. That is no crime." Stung by her calm rebuttal, Jaros merely turned and strode away, leaving Lyra shaking with mingled anger and sorrow. She found Alan waiting in the corridor, concern etched on his face. Wordlessly, she slipped her hand into his, letting the steadiness of his presence ground her. He squeezed her fingers gently, and though no words passed between them, the simple contact held more comfort than any speech could offer. As weeks blended into months, Lyra's progress soared beyond the hopes she dared harbor. She still used the walker for longer distances, but for short stretches within the clinic, she strode unaided. Her gait was cautious, sometimes shaky, but undeniably real. Every step blossomed with purpose, an emblem of her newfound independence. On one particularly bright morning, Anareth beckoned her to a newly repurposed corner of the clinic, where a specialized scanning bed had been set up. "We wish to run a comprehensive test on your spinal lattice," she explained, "to see precisely how these new nerve pathways have formed." With that, Lyra lay down, and the machine hummed around her, passing beams of soft, colored light across her body. A screen displayed a mesmerizing image of her spine, the standard vertebrae overlaid with the intricate luminous threads that were uniquely Zareth. As the scanning deepened, those in attendance gaped at the sight. The once dormant filaments now glowed in branching patterns, connecting the root of her spine to the far reaches of her limbs. The arrangement was not exactly what the old Zareth text depicted, but it was functional. Lyra's body had forged new connections, bridging the gap with tenacity and maybe a dash of Earth's raw creativity. Alan, watching from the sidelines, felt a surge of pride. So, too, did Annareth, though she scrutinized the readouts with a mixture of awe and an undercurrent of concern. "It's extraordinary," she whispered, "but we must be cautious. Uncharted territory always bears risk." Lyra, climbing off the scanning bed, tested her feet against the floor. They supported her well enough. She met Annareth's gaze steadily. "I know the risks," she replied. "But if I can walk, truly walk, it's worth all the risk in the galaxy." Annareth bowed her head, a reluctant smile playing on her lips. "Then walk you shall." Despite the remarkable progress, internal struggles threatened to tear the partnership apart. Earth's authorities demanded more formal frameworks. They wanted signed agreements ensuring that any major breakthroughs or patents derived from the new therapy would remain accessible to Earth. Meanwhile, Zareth's political class balked at the notion that humans might share equal credit for what they perceived as a purely Zareth biological phenomenon. Caught between these factions, Alan and Lyra worked tirelessly to safeguard the collaborative nature of their project. They sat through endless virtual conferences, hammered out draft after draft of official documents, and tried to reassure both sides that the ultimate goal was not to claim glory but to help those in need. With Annareth's voice of reason, they managed to soothe some tensions, but murmurings of discontent remained. In the midst of these negotiations, Counselor Jaros reappeared, bearing news that the Zareth Council now requested Lyra's presence on their homeworld for an in-person demonstration of her progress. Alan's staff grew uneasy. How could they protect her from political machinations if she returned, half-healed, to a planet that had long dismissed her? But Lyra, ever the diplomat, saw an opportunity to prove the therapy's success on a grand stage. She accepted. "I will go," she announced, standing in the clinic's open foyer, her posture more confident than ever. "But I won't go alone. Dr. Stone must come with me, if only to ensure continuity of care." Silence followed her statement, as staff and visitors exchanged wary glances. At last, Jaros nodded slowly. "The council has not objected to that arrangement," he said, though his tone implied that the council had indeed debated it fervently. "We depart in 1 Earth week, Ms. Moraine. Prepare yourself." The following days passed in a flurry. Alan arranged for his clinic's leadership to be assumed by a trusted colleague. He pulled up old notes from his war travels to recall the complexities of interplanetary transport. Lyra, for her part, spent hours refining her walking abilities, determined to appear as strong as possible upon returning to the planet that once wrote her off as irreversibly disabled. Their final night on Earth, they shared a quiet moment along the stony shore of Evergreen Bay. The moonlight spilled a silver path across the waters, and the hush of distant waves underscored the hush between them. At length, Lyra spoke. "Dr. Stone," she began, then paused, gazing at the moon's reflection. "Alan." He turned, surprised to hear her address him by his first name, something she rarely did. Her voice was laced with sincerity. "You've done more for me than I can ever repay. You've given me back life." He opened his mouth to respond, but words eluded him. In that moment, he felt an unguarded tenderness well up within him. Slowly, almost tentatively, he reached out to take her hand. She allowed it, turning to face him in the moonlit stillness, her purple skin gleaming faintly. "I only did what any decent physician would do," he managed softly, though he knew that was a half-truth, for his devotion to her case went far beyond professional duty. Lyra shook her head, her eyes glimmering. "No, most would have tried the standard routes. You risked everything, and in the process, I think you've healed more than just my body." Their gaze held. 1,000 unspoken feelings coursed through that shared silence. Then, gently, Alan drew her into an embrace. The simple warmth of their contact, beneath the watchful moon, transcended the gulf between species. He felt her trembling slightly, whether from emotion or the exertion of standing, he knew not. He whispered, "We'll face Zareth together. And whatever happens, know that I won't abandon you." She exhaled, leaning into him. "Thank you, Alan." For a long moment, they stood intertwined, two figures joined by hope and something more delicate, yet no less powerful. Then the tide's quiet hush reminded them of the passage of time, and they turned to walk back to the clinic, step by measured step. The journey to Zareth was swift, borne on the wings of a star cruiser that harnessed spacefold technology. Yet, to Alan, who had not left Earth's atmosphere in many years, it felt both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. Lyra, though intimately familiar with space travel, sensed his unease and offered a reassuring hand as the cruiser shifted into a dimension where stars blurred like white ribbons. Upon arrival in the capital city, they were greeted with formalities befitting a diplomat, though the gathered crowd regarded Alan with open curiosity. The spires of the city soared in silver arcs, glinting under a turquoise sky, and the streets pulsed with an undercurrent of refined technology. Hover vehicles zipped about, and luminous signage in swirling Zareth script guided them to the medical complex where the demonstration would occur. Before they could settle in, Counselor Jaros announced that a grand assembly was convening in 3 days. They expected Lyra to stand before the council, walk across the dais, and present her testimony. The stakes were immense. If she succeeded, she would become a living testament to the power of Earth's therapy. If she failed, the voices calling her return a farce would be vindicated. Alan, ever calm, spent the interim preparing her, refining each move, building her confidence. But he could not entirely silence the tremors of fear that threatened to rattle her composure. Zareth's capital felt overwhelming, its people's gazes heavy with expectations, doubts, and a certain measure of awe. On the eve of the assembly, as they shared a simple meal in a guest suite, Lyra confided, "Sometimes I wonder if I'm truly strong enough. What if I falter out there in front of them all?" He reached across the table, gently covering her hand with his. "We've come too far," he said gently. "Your own body has proven it can do the impossible. Believe in that, if nothing else." Her lips curved in a wistful smile, and for the briefest moment, she yearned to lean closer, to close the distance between them. But the labyrinth of politics and cultural norms stayed her. Tomorrow, after all, might shift the course of her entire life. The Grand Assembly Hall was a cathedral of gleaming metal and crystalline arches, lined with row upon row of seats filled by high-ranking officials, medics, scholars, and other dignitaries. At the far end, a raised dais stood before a massive window that framed Zareth's azure horizon. Lyra waited in the wings, heart hammering, as Counselor Jaros opened the proceedings with formalities and protocol. Dr. Stone stood beside her, wearing an Earth-style suit that felt uncomfortably formal, yet suitably dignified. A hush fell as Jaros turned to Lyra, voice echoing through the amplifiers. "Ms. Lyra Moraine, diplomat of Zareth, step forward if you can and address the council." Lyra inhaled, eyes flicking to Alan. He gave a small, encouraging nod. Then she stepped out onto the dais. Murmurs rippled through the assembly as she walked unaided to the center, each step carefully placed. Her posture was not perfect. The faint tremor in her legs was visible if one looked closely. But she moved forward, upright, guided by months of grueling practice and unyielding will. When she finally reached the center, she paused, turning to face the gathered officials. This was the moment. Her chest tightened, but she knew she had come too far to falter. She drew herself up, summoning all her training, both as a diplomat and as a patient who had fought to reclaim her body. "In my youth," she began, voice steady despite the swirl of nerves, "I ran through the moonlit meadows of Zareth. I danced in our great halls. Then an accident took my ability to walk. For years, I sought every remedy our world could offer, but none restored my freedom." She paused, letting them absorb her words. "Earth's doctor, Alan Stone has done what was deemed impossible. Through his approach, merging simple hands-on therapy with resonant frequencies, I stand before you on my own 2 feet, no longer bound by the device that once defined my existence." Somewhere, in a distant seat, a figure rose to protest. Another exclaimed in wonder. Lyra pressed on. "It is not that Earth is superior to Zareth, or that we are superior to them. It is that together, Our knowledge has expanded beyond what we believed possible. I am living proof that by opening our minds, by sharing what we each do best, we can achieve miracles. Silence. A charged hush. Then, from the side, Alan stepped into view, at Lyra's beckoning. She extended a hand toward him. I owe my progress to his perseverance, she continued, and I beseech the Council to recognize the value in forging a permanent alliance of medical research. Let not pride or fear of change stand in the way of healing our people. For a moment, the hush persisted, thick with the weight of all that had been said. Counselor Jaros exchanged glances with High Medic Anareth, who was seated among the robed officials. Then, from somewhere in the assembly, a slow, measured applause began. It spread, gathering momentum, rising into a chorus. Lyra's cheeks warmed, tears threatening as she realized they were applauding her, and more importantly, the achievement that transcended old boundaries. Jaros rapped his staff to restore order. Ms. Moraine, he said in a voice that faltered with subdued respect, your demonstration speaks louder than words. We cannot deny what we have witnessed. The Council will deliberate. But for now, let it be known that your journey stands as a beacon for all. The Council's deliberations continued late into the night, behind closed doors. Alan and Lyra waited in an antechamber, the tension thick enough to be cut with a knife. Finally, in the early hours, word arrived. A representative approached them, voice solemn. The Council has decided that your therapy, which merges Earth methodology with Zaratha's advanced understanding, shall receive official backing. A permanent research station will be established, bridging our worlds. And, Ms. Moraine, you shall head that initiative on behalf of Zarath. Stunned, Lyra nearly lost her balance. Alan steadied her gently, his smile tugging at the corners of his weary eyes. They agreed? He breathed, hardly daring to believe. The representative nodded. They did. You both will collaborate here and on Earth as needed, ensuring the knowledge flows freely between our species. Relief, joy, and triumph swirled in Lyra's heart, culminating in a surge of gratitude that only had one outlet. Impulsively, she turned to Alan, pressing her palms to his shoulders. His eyes widened as she, trembling with emotion, rose to kiss him gently on the cheek. The hush of the corridor enveloped them. He blinked in surprise, then, with a tender warmth, bent his head and pressed his lips to hers. In that moment, the worry of onlookers, the constraints of decorum, all melted away. They were just two souls whose paths had intertwined, forging a bond that soared beyond any horizon. When they parted, Lyra's cheeks colored a deeper shade of violet, but her gaze glowed with unfiltered happiness. Dr. Stone, no less moved, softly murmured, I suppose, Ms. Moraine, we'll have a lot of work ahead of us. She laughed, eyes shining with tears of joy. Call me Lyra. And yes, Alan, a lifetime's worth of work, and a future where we stand as equals. The next few days were a blur of official statements, celebratory gatherings, and an outpouring of goodwill. Zaratha's populace, learning of Lyra's recovery, reacted with awe, some with skepticism. But the tide was turning. In the city's plazas, images of Lyra standing tall circulated on luminous screens, accompanied by bulletins praising interplanetary cooperation. Even Counselor Jaros, once so critical, offered a measured but genuine congratulation, acknowledging that perhaps tradition and innovation could coexist. Alan and Lyra, caught in the swirl of excitement, found solace in private moments, stolen amid the flurry of official demands. A stroll through Zaratha's silver gardens, where glowing blossoms emitted a soft luminescence, offered a chance to reflect on how far they had come. Each gentle footstep reminded Lyra of the miracle she now lived each day. She had parted from that hover chair, from that sense of entrapment, into a world where she felt lighter, freer, and no longer alone. At length, they departed Zarath, returning to Earth with the promise of establishing a new research branch adjacent to Stone's Evergreen Clinic. The day they touched down in Cascade Hills, a crowd of well-wishers and old patients greeted them with cheers, the local media thrumming with pride that one of their own had helped spark a cosmic change. Days stretched into weeks, and the synergy across worlds deepened. More specialists arrived, forging a new era of medical advancement. Lyra, embracing her dual role as both a diplomat and a patient-turned-advocate, became the face of possibility. And always by her side was Dr. Alan Stone, whose healing hands had done the impossible, and whose heart, she realized, had found a home in hers. It was a crisp, sunlit afternoon when Lyra walked, unassisted, along the sandy shore of Evergreen Bay. She wore a simple earth dress, her bare feet pressing into the damp sand as the gentle waves lapped at her ankles. The breeze carried the scent of salt and pine. Alan strolled beside her, occasionally offering an arm when the sand shifted beneath her feet. Yet she found her footing stable, her legs strong. With each passing day, she claimed more of her life back. Pausing, they both turned to watch the sun dip below the rolling waves. He slipped an arm around her waist, and she leaned against him. 10 years ago, she murmured, I thought I'd never feel sand between my toes again. I was certain I'd be trapped in that chair forever. Alan pulled her closer, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. And look at you now, Lyra Moraine, walking the coastline like you were born to it. She breathed a contented sigh. I'm grateful, she said, voice hushed. To you, to your clinic, to the little corners of chance that led me here. I never dared dream my story would end in such light. He gazed at her, a quiet reverence in his eyes. It's not ending, he corrected softly. This is just the next chapter. Then, as the last rays of the sun painted the sky in gold and rose, Lyra turned fully to him, cupping his cheek in her purple hand. He smiled in that gentle way she had come to love. In the hush of that liminal moment, they shared a kiss that was at once an affirmation of the present and a vow for the future. A future shaped by hope, courage, and the certainty that unity could bridge even the vastness of worlds. For indeed, her story, like their shared journey, had only just begun.